What is wrong with the Chicago Bears? Well, strap in. This is going to be a time. Grossi Posse Packer Nation. Welcome to an episode of Podcast and Podcast where you don't have to be Packers fan, but it sure does help. I'm your host, Tom. Yeah, we're going to talk about the Bears, Grossi, and today, a little bit of a different episode, and every now and then, it's rare. Every now and then, I'll kind of do a deep dive on another team that is just interesting to me. And I did this a few years ago when Mitch Trubisky was the QB of the Bears and the Bears were struggling. And I made a whole video basically saying it's not all on Mitch Trubisky. And I thought about making a similar video about Justin Fields, how Justin Fields is definitely not helping, but he isn't the entire problem. But upon researching and looking into it more, I kind of pivoted a little bit. And instead, I'm going to kind of go back a lot further than just Justin Fields, because the problems with the Bears have stemmed for far longer than just Justin Fields' tenure, and it goes way beyond this season. However, what has happened in the past has directly led to what's happened this season, and I think has led to a lot of the current emotions that Bears fans are feeling, because it's not just, oh man, we suck again, here we go, rebuild. It's different this time, and I think it's different because of how the Bears communicated how this season was going to go, and on top of that, the decisions that they have made in terms of personnel for over a decade that have currently led them to this point where fans are pretty much just fed up. And so, let's get started. The Chicago Bears right now are currently sitting at 0-3. They have the turd Super Bowl that is going to be the Broncos-Bears coming up this Sunday, where it is very possible that they fall to 0-4. And I think there's a very strong argument to be made that the Bears are the worst team in the NFL right now. Now, if you go back a month ago, you will find a very different narrative that is being talked about amongst Bears fans. And I know that I poked a lot about this too, because during the offseason, I heard a ton from Bears fans. How it was Justin Fields' division, how they were going to run the North, how Jordan Love's going to be garbage, all this stuff, right? And I'm going to put all of that aside because, quite honestly, it doesn't really matter. But what does matter is there was a level of excitement, enthusiasm, and hope from Bears fans heading into this season. And it makes a lot of sense why. Last year, the Bears struggled. However, about midway through the season, you saw a shift in which Luke Getsy started calling some more plays in which Justin Fields was able to just run around and show how much of a dynamic player he could be. So yes, the Bears were the worst team in the league last season. However, there was kind of that asterisk that was there. And no, not just on the Lions win against the Chiefs. I'm just kidding. But there was an asterisk there going, listen, we're not going to be in this position next year because we have the first overall pick who everybody knew they were going to trade away for a haul, which they did to the Panthers. And now they're going to build a team around Justin Fields, which includes the offensive line, of course, trading for DJ Moore, getting him a true weapon, and it was going to be a different season. Maybe not Super Bowl, but there was those murmurings of dark horse team. They're definitely not going to finish last, and they are at least going to be competitive. And so now, a month later, we're talking about burning things down. Are the Bears even going to move forward with Fields, or are they going to draft a QB with either their or the Panthers pick in April of next year during the draft? So in a month, things have spiraled to the point where we're talking about everybody losing their jobs. Fans are completely and totally fed up. And quite honestly, I think there's a breaking point that has happened. And I want to answer the question, why? Why this year, in the span of a month, that this went from such a hyped up team from the Chicago fan base to now them turning on them and saying, no, something has to change. And that's what I hope to do with today's video. And so let us begin. The 2010 to 2011 NFL season, the Chicago Bears were a good football team. They made it all the way to the NFC Championship game under Jay Cutler, who was playing pretty darn well, and they lost to the Packers. The Packers would eventually go on to win Super Bowl 45. Did I need to mention that? No, but I'm going to. Now, this was Jay Cutler's second season as the Chicago Bears QB. They made a massive trade for him, and this was the start of something that was positive for Chicago, obviously, because they made it one game before the Super Bowl in just 2 seasons. Now, since that time, the Chicago Bears have had a total of 2 winning seasons in over a decade of play. They've had 2 playoff appearances, both being bounced in the wild card round, 4 starting quarterbacks when the season has started in September, 4 different GMs, and 4 different head coaches. So there has been a lot of turnover at Halas Hall. And the first thing I want to take a look at are the GMs of the Chicago Bears in that time. You had Angelo, who was gone in 2011, followed by Phil Emery, Ryan Pace, and now Ryan Poles. And there has been a consistent thing in each of those hirings, and that's what I kind of want to dive into today. And let's start with the most recent GM hire, and that is Ryan Poles. To hire Ryan Poles, there was a 5-member committee that was put together in order to do so. On that committee, you have George McCaskey, who makes a lot of sense, owner, Ted Phillips, Bill Polian, Lamar Campbell, and Tanisha Wade. And I'm really just going to kind of focus on 3 of those individuals here because those 3 individuals have been a part of all of the GM hirings that have happened since they went to that NFC Championship game. And the process with Ryan Poles was a little bit weird. You had George McCaskey come out and say that they wanted to cast a wide net. They wanted an extensive search. And so on the Bears website, it says, after a 13-day extensive search, Ryan Poles was eventually hired. Now, this committee interviewed Poles a total of 2 times, and they didn't even interview all of the finalists. They only interviewed 1 of the 3 finalists, and that would eventually be their eventual GM, Ryan Poles. Now, Ryan Poles had an extensive background in scouting and player personnel, something that George McCaskey said in 2013 he wanted to stay very far away from. He said that he would only get involved because he wanted to assure Bear fans that he wouldn't involve himself in player personnel issues or decisions unless there was a question of character. So a lot of the guys that they have hired have background in scouting and player personnel, as George McCaskey seems like he wants to be pretty hands-off. Now, Ryan Poles would eventually go and hire Eberflus, their new head coach, and that would be a total of 48 hours before they announced that decision. Poles wound up saying about Eberflus that the moment that he walked into the room, he knew that he was the guy. And again, it took only 48 hours. So, Eberflus drew a ton of criticism because he wasn't an offensive-minded coach. He was well-respected, but he was a defensive coach for the Indianapolis Colts. And a lot of Bears fans looked at this going, why are we bringing in a DC when we are trying to work on our offense? Of course, the history of the Bears relies on a strong running game and a great defense, but over the past few years, the Bears have definitely been shifting in a different direction. And now here we sit a month into the season in which Eberflus and Poles, being brought in last year, have not won a game since last October, and it seems like the sky is falling. And so, why am I bringing this up? Because 3 of the individuals who were involved in hiring Ryan Poles were also involved in hiring all the other previous GMs. And the way that they did it is a bit strange. So in 2012, Phil Emery is hired. He spends 3 years with the Bears, and just the way that he's hired is a weird, dysfunctional thing. Lovie Smith has to be retained. That's like one of the main factors in Phil Emery getting hired, so Lovie Smith kind of had to approve of it. And in the 3 years, it's a disaster. Lovie Smith eventually gets fired. On top of that, he does hire Mark Trestman, which is horrific as a head coach. On top of that, their handling of Brian Urlacher is really a strike against Emery. And as I said, after 3 years, he gets cut. Ted Phillips is directly involved in bringing in Phil Emery. And of course, George McCaskey is in there as well. So right off the bat, it's this weird kind of thing that's going on in 2012, fresh off of the success that they had just a couple seasons earlier when they went to the NFC Championship game, in which the owner, McCaskey, is giving responsibility to guys like Ted Phillips to go and find a new GM, which is fine because you can outsource that. The Packers do the same exact thing. And then also clear it with your head coach that this is the guy that's being brought in. Also, your head coach can't get fired, so you have to okay it, but also the head coach winds up getting fired. It's just muddled and confusing. But Emery lasts 3 years before they bring in Ryan Pace in January of 2015. And you guessed it, he has an expertise in player personnel and scouting. Now, this was controversial because everybody else was pretty surprised about this, about bringing in Ryan Pace, because many assumed that it was going to be Chris Ballard. And Chris Ballard wanted 2 things if he was going to become the GM of the Bears. He wanted to report directly to ownership, to McCaskey, and he wanted to move on from Jay Cutler, because at that time, Jay Cutler, there was a huge contract that was looming, and they had to make a decision about what to do with him. And so Ryan Pace is eventually hired, and the details surrounding his hiring were really scarce at the time. However, However, the Bears on January 8th of 2015 put out on their own website that Bears lauded for hiring Pace as GM, in which you have a whole bunch of tweets from a whole bunch of influential people in the NFL saying, yes, this was the right move, absolutely. And it wouldn't be until years later that an in-depth piece by The Athletic kind of revealed how shady this hiring actually was. Because Ryan Pace had really strong connections with Mickey Loomis and Sean Payton, and basically they wanted to push him to be a GM. And so he eventually landed the GM job with the Bears, but it was described as being the Bill Polian show. And again, I mentioned Polian before because he, with Ted Phillips and George McCaskey, have been responsible for hiring all these guys. But as we've already been able to show, maybe Bill Polian and Ted Phillips don't have the best grasp on hiring these guys because they're not working out. And at the time, Ryan Pace was the youngest GM in the NFL at 37 years old. So again, a bit of a surprise for Bears fans. Now, Ryan Pace's tenure as the Bears GM did not go swimmingly either. Ryan Pace took a big swing and drafted Mitch Trubisky, trading up to get him. And yes, while they made the playoffs 2 times, now Poles is trying to clean up Pace's mess because they really weren't able to do anything with it, and they put a lot of their eggs in the Mitch Trubisky basket. And after that one really successful year, while they did make the playoffs at 8-8 a couple years later, not really much amounted to it. And now let's get back to present day and talk about the hiring of Poles, which again, Ted Phillips, Bill Polian, and George McCaskey are directly involved with this. And Bears fans, I know I don't gotta tell you, they are not really super thrilled about Ted Phillips. Ted Phillips is a longtime executive. He had been the president of the Bears for a long, long time. And so when he announced that he would retire at the end of February of this year, fans were not too broken up about it. And Ted Phillips, to his word, did retire in February of 2023. They wound up hiring Kevin Warren as the new president and CEO of the Bears, who is going to spearhead the construction of the new stadium and hopefully get the Bears on the right track. However, Ted Phillips did not go gently into that good night. It was announced later in April that he would be staying on as a senior consultant. And if you go on the Bears website right now, his picture's still right up there as a senior consultant. And so for whatever reason, the Bears are not letting Ted Phillips go. And so the point that I'm trying to make here, giving you all of this context, is that George McCaskey, who has come out and said in 2013 that he doesn't want to be involved with player personnel or any of this stuff, and who seems to kind of be very hands-off and allow guys like Phillips and Polian to make these decisions, Phillips and Polian have not done a good job, and both of them are still heavily involved with the team. So at some point, you do need to question George McCaskey and the people that he is trusting to hire his GMs who would eventually hire these coaches, which, by the way, it hasn't been a good track record, as we've already talked about, and those GMs and coaches are working together to bring together a team, and right now, that team is doing very poorly. But I want to go a bit further than even that, because maybe McCaskey is just not trusting the right people, and unfortunately, Bears fans are not going to be able to do much about that. Similar to like it was in Washington with Dan Snyder. Dan Snyder, horrific owner, and I am not comparing George McCaskey to Dan Snyder in any way, shape, or form. But my point being is that if there's an issue with an owner, there's very little that you can do about it as a fan, because you can fire coaches and you can fire GMs. But if guys like Phillips and Polian are making the decisions on who to bring in, you see how it's cyclical and we're winding up with the same exact results. And that's what it seems like is going on in Chicago. It's banging your head against the wall, in which these individuals are responsible for hiring the new GM, who then turn around and hire the head coach, and then things go wrong. And so, again, to answer the question, why are things different now? And that stems from the communication from the Bears to their fans. And this is something that I would love to dive deeper into, and I've kind of alluded to it a few times, but the way that teams communicate with their fans, I think, is super duper important. And it's not just what they do on social media or about posting memes or, they're really good at schedule releases like the Chargers social media team. The teams are responsible for communicating expectations to their fans. When Ryan Poles was hired, I'm sure many of you remember that video of him walking in from his car looking like a badass, right? And that's put out there and kind of just raising him up. And of course, they're going to build hype for their new hires, absolutely. And even when Eberflus is hired, they're still pushing that like, nope, this is a good decision. But after years and years and years of the performance on the field not being up to par, the hiring of head coaches and GMs who are not working out, and it seems like every new GM has to clean up the mess of the previous one, Bears fans are not so trusting anymore. And so the reason why heading into October now, Bears fans are super pissed is because last year it seemed like it was different. When Justin Fields was drafted, the amount of hype that was behind that trade was insane. He was being lauded as the new savior of Chicago. Ryan Poles could do no wrong. And it was like, we don't know about Eberflus, but Poles is getting it done. Then they orchestrate the trade of the first overall pick. That goes super well. They bring in DJ Moore. This is it. And this entire offseason is hype, 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 hype. And now they're 0-3. All of the issues that are going on the field, whether it's Luke Getsy, whether it's Eberflus, whether it's Justin Fields, whether it's the offensive line, all of this stuff. We can talk about the on-the-field issues all day. And there's plenty of great creators who have broken down tape and gone into that. And I'm not just going to regurgitate that because those folks do a great job. Go check them out, like the QB School. But it's different now because Bears fans, after kind of being promised that, okay, it's not like last time. It's not like it has been. We have our guy, now we build around him. Well, that's not really working out. And again, it's super early in the season. Who knows? Maybe they could pull it off like last year and Fields will start to get into a rhythm. But this was not the expectation. And the expectation was week 1, they were going to beat the Green Bay Packers. And they didn't. And they got beat at home. That second half was rough. And since that point, it has only gotten worse for the Chicago Bears. They look like they are a mess. Justin Fields is talking about coaches. And now they're saying, oh no, everything is fine. It's a disaster. Everything looks bad in Chicago. And so you might be thinking, well, okay, I might be a fan of a bad team, just insert any other team, but that means we have a high draft pick. The issue is that even with likely 2 high draft picks, I think the Chicago fan base is looking at who's in the front office and going, I don't trust them. I don't trust them to make the right decision on who to draft. And even if they draft the right guy, I don't trust them to actually develop them because that is another issue that has happened because they're bringing in guys with player personnel experience, scouting experience. They're drafting guys and they're not being developed. The Mitch Trubisky's of the world, and I'm not saying Trubisky's a phenomenal quarterback, but he got you to the playoffs twice. Justin Fields, he's a super athletic, right? But things are not translating and he's also not being helped out on the field. And again, he's making his own mistakes too. So let's just say the Bears have the number 1 overall pick and they go, all right, let's move on from Justin Fields, who 2 seasons ago, he was our guy, but now let's go get Caleb Williams. Is there any faith that the Bears are going to actually build a team around him, 1, and 2, develop him into being the quarterback that is going to lead them to success? Because they haven't done it in a very, very long time. Jay Cutler was a trade. He was already a veteran QB. They brought him in, found success. And maybe that's what the Bears need to do because they tried it with Trubisky, they tried it with Fields, and they've tried it numerous other times. But when they found success in a guy like Jay Cutler, it was because they didn't develop him. So even that in of itself is so deflating if you're a Bears fan because it's not just, okay, if we suck, the light is at the end of the tunnel. The sucking has been happening and the light has been promised now for years and years and years, and it's not happening. Whether it's brand new head coaches coming out saying we're going to run the North or we're going to beat the Packers, all these things, they're not happening. And there's only so much that a team can say to its fan base before the fan base goes, I don't believe you. And right now, I think that's what's happening in Chicago. And until there is some faith that is restored between the team and its fan base, I have a feeling that tension is going to still be there. But let me know what you think down in the comments below. You can always send me at Tom Grossi Comedy, all social media see down below. A big shout and thank you to all the patrons and YouTube members for supporting this channel. And thank you so much for watching. I'm Tom Grossi. And as always, go Pack Go.